I should have never gone back to Ashwood. Everyone in town told me to leave it alone, that some things ought to rot in peace. But the truth is, the house had been waiting for me. I grew up on the edge of Harriston, a little mill town tucked into the forests of western Pennsylvania. We weren't poor, exactly, but we weren't rich, either, and my family rented a shabby little home on the outskirts, while looming just past the ridge stood the mansion everyone whispered about, the Ashwood House. It was 3 stories tall, with blackened windows and a roof that looked like jagged teeth against the sky. The shutters hung crooked, vines coiled around the porch like veins, and no one ever saw anyone go in or out. By the time I was 12, it was nothing but a local dare. Go knock on the front door and run before the devil answers. The devil, of course, never answered, but something else did. It was a summer night in 1999 when I first stepped inside. My friends, Eddie, Shane, and Lisa, dared me to do it. The rule was simple. Touch the staircase inside, then come back out. No flashlights, no tricks. We slipped through a broken window in the back. The smell hit me first. Wet wood, mold, something faintly metallic, like rust or dried blood. My sneakers crunched on broken glass as I moved through the dining room. I can still see it. The wallpaper peeling like burned skin, the chandelier swaying though there was no wind, the table set with plates that looked fused to the wood with age. And then the sound. Footsteps. Not mine. Not the others. From upstairs. I should have run. But I didn't. I crept forward, reached out and touched the banister. The wood was slick, wet, though when I looked at my hand, nothing was there. That's when I heard the voice. A whisper. So faint I thought it came from inside my head. "Welcome home." I bolted, climbed out the window, scraped my knee on the sill, and didn't stop running until my lungs burned. Eddie swore I was pale as chalk, and Lisa said my lips kept moving like I was mumbling something. But I wasn't. At least, I don't think I was. I left Harriston at 18, swearing never to look back. Went to college, bounced around jobs, drank too much, married too young, divorced just as quick. Life happens that way, I guess. But Ashwood never left me. I'd dream of the staircase, the whisper, the chandelier swaying. Sometimes I'd wake up with my hand damp, as if I'd just touched that slick banister again. By the time I was 35, the house wasn't just a memory. It was an itch I couldn't scratch. Every bad turn in my life, I found myself blaming it. Like the place had planted something in me that night, something that grew with me, fed off me. And then one evening, while scrolling through Facebook, I saw a post in the Harriston community group. Ashwood House to be demolished. Grounds marked unsafe. Work begins this fall. I stared at it for what felt like hours. They were going to tear it down. Erase it. And yet, I couldn't let that happen. Because the truth was, I needed to see it again. I drove into Harriston on a rainy September afternoon, the sky bruised purple and gray, the town smaller than I remembered. Most of the old shops had closed, the mill was gone, and the air smelled of wet leaves and rust. The Ashwood House was still there, crouched at the end of its long dirt drive. A chain-link fence wrapped around the property with warning signs nailed to it. Danger, no trespassing, unsafe structure. I parked half a mile down and walked. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, as if the house had its own gravity pulling me toward it. The fence wasn't locked, just wired shut.
I pried it open and slipped through. My sneakers sank into mud as I climbed the porch steps. The wood groaned like a warning, but the door gave way with the softest sigh, almost like it was glad to see me. Inside, the smell was the same. The chandelier was still there, still swaying, though the air was still. Dust motes floated like tiny spirits in the beam of my flashlight. I whispered, half to mock myself, half because I couldn't help it. Home sweet home. And the house whispered back. Not words this time, just a sound, low and deep, rising from the floorboards, like a growl. The deeper I went, the more I realized the house wasn't empty. Not in the way we think of empty. Every room seemed to breathe. Walls shifted ever so slightly, inhaling, exhaling. The wallpaper pulsed faintly, as though veins ran beneath it. When I pressed my hand to the banister again, it wasn't slick this time. It was warm. Warm like flesh. I should have left then, but I couldn't. Something had me. I climbed to the second floor. The steps moaned, but not with the sound of old wood. No, this was wetter, thicker, like meat being pulled apart. The hallway was lined with doors, each one slightly open. I could hear things behind them. A baby crying, a man coughing, a woman humming a lullaby I half remembered from childhood. My flashlight flickered, died. In the dark, one of the doors swung open, and something came out. At first, I thought it was a person. A man, maybe. Tall, broad shoulders, but as it stepped closer, the details refused to stick. His face kept changing. My father's, my high school principal's, a stranger's. His arms bent the wrong way, elbows folding forward, backward, his mouth stretched too wide. "Welcome home," he said. Same whisper I'd heard as a kid. I stumbled back, my heel catching on a floorboard, and fell hard. The shape bent over me, that ever-shifting face dripping shadows onto mine. Then suddenly, it was gone. Like it had never been there at all. I scrambled to my feet, panting, and ran for the stairs, but the house had changed. The staircase wasn't where it had been. The hallway stretched longer, the wallpaper pulsing faster, the doors slamming shut one by one. I wasn't in the Ashwood House anymore. I was in something else. I wandered that house for hours. At least it felt like hours. Time didn't work right inside. The hallways twisted, folded back on themselves, stairs led to nowhere, and windows opened only onto blackness. Sometimes I'd see shapes in the dark, faces pressed against the wallpaper, hands reaching out of the ceiling. I heard Lisa's voice once, calling my name, though Lisa had been dead 10 years from an overdose. I called back. Stupid, I know. But when I turned the corner, I didn't see Lisa. I saw myself. Standing at the end of the hall, pale and thin, lips moving in a whisper I couldn't hear. My double reached out its hand, then crumbled into dust that drifted toward me like smoke. I kept moving, though. Every step felt heavier. The air grew thicker, hotter, until breathing felt like drowning. That's when I found the nursery. The door was painted yellow, though the color had rotted to a sickly, pus-like shade. Inside, the walls were covered in drawings, crude crayon sketches of people with no faces,
Some were standing, some were lying down, some were hanging from ropes. In the center of the room sat a crib, and in the crib, something moved. I don't want to describe it. Not fully.
It wasn't a baby. Not anymore. Its head was too big, its eyes sunk in pits, its mouth a lipless wound that opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The sound it made, wet, hungry, still rattles in my bones. When it turned toward me, I knew what it was. It was me. Not the grown man I'd become, no, the baby version, twisted, rotting, still trying to breathe. I screamed. The thing screamed back, and its cry shook the walls until cracks split down the plaster. The crib splintered, and the creature dragged itself toward me on boneless limbs, shrieking with my voice. I ran. Every hallway pushed me downward. No matter which door I chose, I ended up on a staircase spiraling into the ground. The air grew colder, wetter, the walls dripping with something dark that smelled like rust and rot. Finally, I came to the basement. It was enormous, far larger than the house above, a cavern of stone and dirt, lit by no source I could see, yet glowing faintly red, like coals buried in ash. And there, in the center, stood the thing I'd felt all my life. The house. Not the wood, not the stone, but the thing inside. A mass of flesh and shadow, hundreds of faces pushing out of it only to sink back in. Arms reached and retracted, mouths whispered, screamed, laughed, sobbed. It spoke, not with one voice, but with all of them. My father's, my mother's, my friends', my ex-wife's, my own. Welcome home. We've been waiting.
I realized then what Ashwood was. Not a house, not even haunted. It was alive. It grew by taking pieces of people, fear, pain, memory, and making them part of itself. That night when I was 12, it had touched me, marked me, and now it wanted me back. I don't remember how I got out, only that I ran, screamed, clawed my way through halls that folded and pulsed, chased by voices that were mine and not mine. When I finally stumbled onto the porch, the sun was rising. My car was still down the road. My hands were bleeding, my clothes soaked in mud, but I was alive. I drove until Harriston was nothing but a blur in the rearview mirror. But even now, I don't feel free. Sometimes late at night, I hear the hum of that lullaby. Sometimes I see faces shift in the mirror, my own stretching into someone else's before snapping back. And sometimes when I wake up, my hand is damp, like I've just touched the banister again. They demolished Ashwood 2 weeks later, flattened it to the foundation. But they don't understand. You can't kill something that was never just wood and nails. It was a knot of memory and hunger. And when you think you've torn it down, you only scatter its seeds. They brought in the bulldozers and the men with hard hats and clipboard smiles.
They hauled the rotten beams out in pieces and stacked them like kindling at the edge of the lot. Sparks flew one afternoon when a chain slipped, and for a moment the whole place smelled of old smoke and iron and something sweeter, more inviting, like a kitchen in summer or someone calling your name from the back porch. The men laughed and shook off their gloves, and I watched from across the road, pretending not to watch, because what else do you do when part of you is under a heap of rubble?
When the rubble was cleared, there was, of course, an empty foundation, a shallow pit full of rainwater and newspaper. The crews joked about ghosts and bad wiring. A surveyor found no cavities, no strange wiring, no tunnels. They wrote reports that said, unsafe structure, demolition complete, no abnormalities found. They stamped them with ink and filed them in metal cabinets that smell like dust and authority. The pile of timber was burned clean. The fire ate the last of the wallpaper in a smoke-slick rush, and I thought maybe ashes would be the last of it. But the next morning, tiny green shoots had split the compacted dirt in a place right at the back of the foundation where the nursery had been. Thin as thread, they rose like the first breath of something patient. I went down on my knees and watched a leaf unfurl, and for one stupid second, I believed I could pull it up and be done with it. My fingers closed around damp soil, and it felt familiar, like the grain of a handrail, like a cheek I used to press against the banister as a boy. I left it there. I did not uproot it. It moved then, if moving is the right word, not with legs, but by degrees. A smell at the edge of my nose, then a small pushing pressure behind my sternum, like the hollow in my chest being prodded awake. Memories rose of scraped knees, of Lisa's laugh spilling into a summer dusk, of my father slamming a door and never coming back, all threaded with a softness that made my mouth ache. The house knows how to sweeten the bait. It knows the lullabies that soothe the bone and the jokes that make the throat relax. It remembers your smell and calls you by it. I told myself I would leave town that night. I told myself 1,000 strategies, burn bridges, change my name, never speak of it again. I drove around until the street lights blurred into one long smear and the radio turned to static, trying to outpace the thought of falling asleep with my fingers sticky, as if I'd been clinging to something sap-stiff. But when I woke, my hand was damp.
Days turned into nights stitched together by small betrayals. I would be washing dishes and catch a glimpse of wallpaper in the reflection of the faucet. I would be shaving and see a banister's shadow across my shoulder. Once I woke to the sound of a baby humming the same tuneless lullaby and found my phone face down on the bed with a cracked screen that had never been mine before. I tried to tell people, picked at the scab of it in the company of coworkers, dropped the words into the mouth of a bartender, and their eyes would slide away the way light slides off glass. You cannot make a story seem credible when the edges of the story belong to the person listening. Sometimes the voices come in groups, like a choir deciding to harmonize. Sometimes it's a single word whispered just under my ear while the kettle boils. Last week, I stood in the supermarket aisle and the fluorescent lights hummed in a pattern that resolved itself into footsteps. My hands began to shake, and I left a cart abandoned in the cereal lane, its box of flakes tilting like an offering. Nothing visible followed me out, of course.
The people who run errands, go to school, pick up kids, they move through the world with a thick skin of practicality. The world stays practical while the things that feed on the cracks wait.
I know better now what it wants. Houses want doors and rooms and keys. This thing wanted pieces of me where it could tuck them in and forget myself into its walls. Memories, warmth, the little surrendered things that make a house a home. Regrets, names, the smell of someone you loved cooking a bad stew. It keeps them and wears them like a glove. I can feel the glove tightening. When I catch myself smiling at an old joke or pausing too long by the hardware store racks, I realize it's not nostalgia. It's being pocketed. The last thing I did before deciding there was no fix left was go back to the lot at night, like I always do when an itch turns to a hurt. The foundation looked small under the moon, a pale scar. A man sat on the corner of the pit, no hard hat, no clipboard, just someone in a threadbare coat who had been watching for a while. He turned his head, and I knew him. Of course I did. He had my eyes, only older. And behind that thin face, the house showed up as a shadowless hollow. He waved a hand, and when he spoke, it was my voice answering.
Did they get it all? I asked stupidly, because asking is human, because some part of me still hoped demolition could be definitive. They never do, he said. They clear the outward, the show. We keep what's left. He tapped the ground where the shoots had pushed through months ago. Homes are stubborn. They keep anniversaries, keep birthdays. They keep doors open for the ones they like. I wanted to hit him then, wanted to shake sense into the blank, pitying calm that made him so much like the man I might be in 20 years. Instead, I crouched there, my hands in wet earth, and the lullaby came up the slope, soft as a moth. The man, me, smiled in that slow, tired way the house likes, and I understood something terrible and simple. The structure had been demolished, but the architecture of it had been copied into me, into my sleep, into the margins of my days, into the private things I never said aloud. I was a foundation now, as much as the pit of stones.
So here I am, writing this because telling feels like action. Because if I spread these words thin enough over paper, maybe they will act like vinegar on a wound. Maybe they won't. The seedlings are still there, a green line at the back of the lot. I go sometimes and trace the curve of a leaf and hear the house speak through it, patient as a clock. I can feel it learning the rhythm of my life, what makes me soft, what makes me come back, so it can set its hooks. If you ever find a place that looks like home and feels like a memory folded in half, watch your hands. Watch what you carry inside them. You can live with a house that is only wood and nails. You can walk away from siding and shingles.
But you cannot as easily walk away from the parts of you that remember being loved there. The thing that fed on those parts is clever. It waits at thresholds, in lullabies, in names you cannot stop saying. It waits politely. It waits with a chair pulled out for you and a plate half eaten. And when you sit down because you are tired, it will close the curtains. Tonight my hand is damp. The pen slips when I finish this last line, and for a second the ink pools like a dark eye. Somewhere a baby hums, and there is the faint creak of a banister. I tell myself I will bury the pages, burn them, swallow them, do anything to stop the echo, but the paper is already wet with the trace of it. Welcome home, the house might say. Welcome back.